All right, welcome to another episode of the Cassels Cast. My name's Eamon Cassels. Joining me today is going to be Kenny Kluska of Dunking with Wolves and the Teacher Talking Sports YouTube channel. Should be a lot of fun. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the Minnesota Timberwolves and New York Knicks seasons. We both cover the Timberwolves, so should be a fun opportunity just to talk about the team a little bit more. And then he's a Knicks fan, so why not talk about his Knicks? They have a very interesting season as well. Both teams are sort of in a similar position, making the conference finals last year, hoping to take that next step up. Without any further ado, let's get into the episode. All right, joining me now is Kenny Kluska to break down the Timberwolves and Knicks up and coming seasons. How you doing today, Kenny?
Good. How are you today? How are you?
Yeah, I'm thriving. I'm ready to get into these discussions and these deep dives. It should be a lot of fun. We should be doing a lot more of these as the offseason rolls forward. But yeah, let's just get started with the Wolves since this is the team that both of us cover. And just thinking about their offseason in general, it's kind of interesting because they didn't make any big moves. Their big moves were really re-signing Naz Reid and Julius Randle after coming off that Western Conference Finals run. We can talk about the Nickeil Alexander-Walker piece after that because that was a big loss for sure. But in general, do you think just bringing back Reid and Randle is enough to at least stay competitive in the West and potentially make a finals run?
I mean, if you follow the Timberwolves, if you just follow the NBA, have a understanding of the salary cap and everything like that, your expectations really couldn't have been for the Timberwolves to make a big splash in the offseason. They had three key free agents, and the assumption was two of them were going to come back. And I feel like it was widely expected that Alexander Walker would be seen as the most expendable of the three. And that was the case as he has walked to the Atlanta Hawks. The Timberwolves have a bunch of shooting guard slash small forward types who have been waiting in the wings for a larger opportunity, and management clearly believes in guys like Terrence Shannon, Jalen Clark, Dillingham making a further step forward. So, taking some of Alexander Walker's minutes. So I don't necessarily have a problem with anything they did in the offseason. You just couldn't expect huge splash. I know, Timberwolves fans still might be thinking, because last October was when that Karl Anthony Towns trade went down. Don't be anticipating that. That's not going to happen. I mean, they do still have two roster spots open. Probably a strong possibility they leave one open for the start of the season. So let's see what they do with that. But, their hands were kind of tied in whether they could make a move to clearly make the team look better. I do think they'll be a playoff team. There are other teams in the West that clearly have improved on paper, but if you asked me entering last year, would I think the Timberwolves were going to make the Western Conference Finals? I highly doubt I would have said yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you really nailed it there. I mean, I think we saw last year you never really know what can happen once the playoffs get rolling. So I think there's certainly a chance that this team ends up making another run. And just bringing back Reed and Randall was awesome moves for them, especially given the contracts. I thought Randall's contract was really incredible value. 3 years, $100 million in the modern NBA is really a steal for a player of Randall's caliber. Reed's deal was a little bit more expensive than I anticipated, but at the same time, to bring back a guy who just won Six Man of the year before is massive, and that's definitely a priority for them because between those two, it was more anticipated that there could have been a chance that Reed actually ended up leaving, whereas Randall, it was almost guaranteed that he was going to come back. Didn't have too many known suitors in that regard, whereas Reed was sort of generating a lot of interest around the league. So even though you might have to overpay for him a little bit, it's definitely worth it just given what he means to this team. But yeah, you look at some of the other teams in the West, like you mentioned, have made significant improvements. I think the most notable two would obviously be the Rockets and Nuggets. The Rockets adding Kevin Durant, and then even a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith just to bolster their win depth even further. And then the Nuggets really improving that supporting cast around Nikola Jokic. It will make it a little bit more challenging, but I think this Wolves team has proven how good they can be in the playoffs, just going back to back Western Conference Finals, and I think that will be an advantage, as well as just the continuity aspect of having Randall in the fold for a full year and him just being used to some of the other guys on the team, which took him a while to get gelling with them in that sense. But once he did, and especially in the playoffs in the last portion of the season, the team really took off, and I think we could see something similar this season. But just looking at the Wolves compared to some of the other teams in the West, how do you think they stack up? I think the Thunder, especially coming off the title, are just clearly above everyone. But with those Rockets, Nuggets, even Clippers teams, how do you view them stacking up?
Yeah, I mean, you can't put any team above the Thunder, or even on the same tier as the Thunder. They haven't lost a single piece from their rotation, had the highest scoring differential in NBA history. So, no, the Thunder clear head and shoulders above the rest of the West. But, things can happen, injuries can occur. So, yeah, right now I would have the Nuggets. They would be probably second in my Western Conference power rankings. Just what's been their major weakness, just not a lot of depth. Adding Bruce Brown, who really hasn't looked like the Bruce Brown who won a championship with the Nuggets in the ensuing 2 years. But, I think coming back to Denver will give him a little bit of a spark. Tim Hardaway Jr., he's had years where he's quite overpaid, but now he's on a minimum deal, another key piece off the bench, so that definitely helps. And just losing those Joker minutes by substantial amounts. I don't know if the net ratings off the top of my head, but they're crazy. The on-off splits. And, Valanciunas, no, he's not a good defender, but, he's a bucket getter. He's a load inside. So, the Nuggets shouldn't go 3-4 minutes without Jokic, scoring 1 or 2 points. They shouldn't have those moments anymore. Yeah, so I just love those additions. Cam Johnson, Michael Porter. It's iffy who I'd consider the better player. I'd probably give a slight advantage to Porter, but we saw Porter not 100% last postseason, and that really affected the Nuggets' chances of beating the Thunder. Rockets, I'm not going to say I'm not a believer, but I don't think I'd give them the same chance that a team like Denver has. Durant, as great an offensive player as he still is, I don't think he truly raises the ceiling as some of the younger superstar talents in the league. Not to say that Houston can't be him, but, they were the second seed in the West without him. They did lose 2 starters. So we'll see how that goes. Jabari Smith, they extended him. Nice player, but not much of a ball handler, can't really dribble much. In my eyes, Easton might be the better player. But yeah, I would probably put maybe Denver on a tier by itself, tier 2, and then tier 3 would probably be Houston, Minnesota, and I would not include the Clippers on that tier. I just think, too many 30 plus guys. Yes, they have a lot of depth, so when Kawhi inevitably misses games and other guys inevitably miss games, those other guys to step in. I just, in today's NBA, I don't think you could really go far with the team, not just 30 plus, but Kawhi, Chris Paul, Nicholas Batum, Brook Lopez are guys way over 30. So I just, I think they'll be top 6, but I think, it'll be a disappointing maybe first round exit for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely agree with you there. Out of those teams, I would definitely have the most confidence in the Nuggets, just seeing what they did last year with so little, taking the Thunder to 7 games, and Jokic's greatness, and then you give him the best supporting cast of his career. It's hard not to have a strong belief in the Nuggets this year, so I would definitely have them in almost a tier by themselves, but maybe in the same tier with the Houston and Timberwolves, just at the top of that tier. And then with the Rockets, I do have a good amount of belief in them, just given how good they were last year without that go-to scorer, and adding Kevin Durant, I think just takes them to another level. I think they could reach that championship, but I do have significant injury concerns, especially with Durant at this stage of his career. So that's why I have a little bit less confidence in them compared to Denver. And then even compared to the Timberwolves, right now I think just considering what these teams look like fully healthy, you have to give the edge to the Rockets. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if that changes in the middle of the season, if this team struggles with injuries, or if their point guard play could be another problem. We can get to that with Minnesota as well, because that's definitely a concern with them. But yeah, I don't think this Rockets team's necessarily perfect, but I would have them slightly above the Timberwolves right now with the caveat that I could see the Timberwolves overtaking them at some point this season and then certainly in the playoffs. But yeah, let's get into the Nickeil Alexander-Walker piece. As we mentioned, they lost him in free agency. He ended up signing with the Hawks. But like you said, they do have two young wins that are ready to take on a bigger role in Terrence Shannon Jr. and Jalen Clark. How confident are you that those two players will be able to really fill the hole that Nickeil is leaving behind? And what do you think of their production this season overall?
I mean, I liked Shannon even in college, so, definitely have belief in him. And, he showed in spurts against OKC where, people were like, Chris Finch, why weren't you playing this guy? You know, Minnesota clearly needed a guy who could get buckets other than Ant-Man. And, Shannon was that guy, and he still wasn't getting substantial minutes. But, he definitely was a spark for them. And, I have no problem with them him receiving, 15 to 20 minutes a game, probably closer to the 15 is more likely. In that time could probably get you 8 points in 15 minutes. Definitely respectable for a bench piece. Jalen Clark, I think he has a lot of qualities of a winning player. Not someone who you're going to see in the box score put up 15, 5, and 5. But, probably not quite as strong a defender as Alexander Walker, but also a less experienced one where maybe he can develop into that guy. So, yeah, I also don't really have a problem with him also receiving 10 to 15 minutes per game. I do think the loss of Alexander Walker does hurt, especially because you can't just assume the team will stay fully healthy the entire season. I mean, we hope DiVincenzo's ready for the start of the season, but I mean, if he's out, then these guys have to play additional minutes. We could talk about Rob Dillingham. Is he ready for that at 20 years old? I mean, at least Shannon and Clark, they're not experienced NBA-wise, that experienced, but they're multi-year college guys. In Shannon Jr.'s case, 5 years, where, I think he's 25, Clark is 23 or 24. So I don't have a problem with them stepping into Alexander Walker's minutes. Might not work out just in the beginning, as Randall and DiVincenzo didn't necessarily fully acclimate to the team right away. So it might take a little bit, 15, 20 games, let's say. But I think by the end of the year, Timberwolves fans wouldn't have a problem with either of them in the rotation. But outside of their top 9, top 10, you just worry about injuries because I'm not sure they have guys to step in to play rotation roles, at least, that can be counted on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, losing Nikhil really does suck because of how important he was to the team. But at the same time, when you have these two players waiting for bigger roles, it makes it a lot easier to replace him. And like you said, I'm not concerned about either of them getting semi big minutes and a role within the rotation. And I think it's also interesting to note that Chris Finch has openly discussed expanding his rotation this year. And I think that's directly tied to belief in these two young guys and then Dillingham, who we're going to get to later. But yeah, I think both of these guys can really replicate different elements of Nikhil's impact. Clark, especially with the on ball defense, like you mentioned, and then Shannon just with the scoring and on ball creation abilities that Nikhil brought to the table. I think it will be really vital. And it's nice that they can have that sort of mix where Shannon provides a little bit more scoring, a little bit more offense, and Clark provides a little bit more defense, although both of them are capable on the other end of the floor as well. So I'm really excited to see what these guys can do with a bigger role. I do think they both have specific swing skill sets. When you look at Clark, he shot the ball over 40% last year, but for his college career, he was just a 30% 3 point shooter. So I'm really looking at that 3 point shooting as a swing skill for him. He's going to get a lot of open looks just being in the corner and really playing off of Ant's gravity and Randall's gravity. But at the same time, they're going to need him to really maintain the shooting that he did last year, which really hasn't been who he is as a player throughout his career. So I think that's something to note. And then with Shannon, I'm looking for him to develop a little bit more as a playmaker. We'll talk about that with the Dillingham piece next, but this team really does lack ball handling and creation. I think he can do it from a shot creation standpoint, but I'm looking for him to be a little bit better as a decision maker and as a playmaker, which we saw definitely some flashes of in Summer League. But again, it's Summer League and he's 25 playing against guys that are 18, 19, 20 years old. So there's a little bit of a caveat there, but I feel like if Shannon can take the next leap as a playmaker, that would just be massive for this team.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about the point guard position, and they might need Shan to play that lead guard role a little more frequently than he might have last year because it is a position that looked like a weakness last season and continues to do so.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a perfect segue into the Rob Dillingham conversation, which we've been hinting at so far throughout the podcast. But I think that's probably the most interesting storyline with this team. I know, just with both of us writing about the team every day, that's something both of us have written about extensively. Is if Dillingham's ready for a bigger role. Without question, just given how they approached this offseason, they didn't really sign another point guard. They didn't draft another point guard. It just really does show that they believe in Dillingham and that he's going to get massive minutes, especially with Conley really struggling last season, turning 38 before this upcoming season starts, and then especially in the playoffs, Conley was struggling. He doesn't have the same burst, doesn't have the same ability to really create for himself that he used to. And when you're 38, it's tough to count on you to get more than like 20 or so minutes a game. So they're going to need Dillingham to have a bigger role, and that also comes with just giving Ant a point guard next to him that can create for himself and create for others. I think is massive. We saw in the playoffs how Ant really benefits from playing that next to that point guard, even though Conley was a little bit limited. The on-off numbers will show that they were actually really good with Conley on the court. So I think that just goes to show just how much it benefits Ant to play next to a point guard. But yeah, overall, where are you at with your Dillingham belief and sort of concerns, or are you just all in on him getting a bigger role?
I can't fully say that I'm all in. I think at the moment he has to get a bigger role, and especially with the way the Timberwolves roster is set, really only two true point guards on them, and one is the aforementioned Conley, who, as you said, will be 38 years old. His production has decreased substantially from his earlier days. And not that I'm not a believer in Dillingham, it just really concerns me that, Chris Finch just never seemed to believe in him. And I get it. He's just 20 years old. But, he's the eighth overall pick. You would think that, when a point guard play is needed, you'd throw him out there. And Finch, a lot of the time refused to, especially in the playoffs. We didn't see him other than garbage time. And I remember an article I did on him, and I was, amazed at the difference between his shooting on the road and at home. So I actually just pulled that up. At home, and again, isn't a large sample size because he took 211 shots on the year, 74 threes, but home 39.2% from the field and 27.5% from the 3-point line, also 1 for 5 from the free throw line, and then on the road over 50% from the field, 41.2% from 3, 14 for 4, and then even 7 for 10 from the free throw line. Obviously a lot better than 1 for 5. So yeah, that really, not something I really noticed during the season. It's just something I noticed after the season. The, crazy differences between how he played at home and how he played on the road. So I really want to be a believer. The Timberwolves absolutely need him to perform better this season. But just seeing Finch's seemingly lack of confidence in him, and also the fact that, let's be honest, the 2024 NBA draft had some good pieces, but it's looking highly unlikely that it's going to be looked, 10, 15 years from now as one of the better drafts. So him being the eighth overall pick isn't the same as it is in other drafts. I mean, a guy like Risache, very good player, but, he's going to probably be the fifth option in Atlanta's starting lineup. He was the first overall pick. Even a guy like Stefan Cassel had a good rookie season, but when you look at the efficiency numbers, they really weren't that good. So, that's something I'm interested in with San Antonio to see how much he plays with Dylan Harper there now. But so yeah, I'm truly hoping Dillingham can make that step because he's going to be needed for, let's say, 15, 20 minutes a night at least to start the season, with the opportunity for that to ramp up. Maybe eventually he gets minutes in the starting lineup. If Conley's downfall continues, if his numbers continue to decrease, if he continues to make less of an impact. And as I mentioned, 2 roster spots open. That Malcolm Brogdon name's been out there. I honestly think he would be the best point guard on the team if he were to join. But of course, he's also an injury prone one. So, you would still have to count on Dillingham, Conley at some point. So, if I were to put on a scale 1 to 10 how concerned I am about the point guard position, I'd probably be somewhere between 7 and 8.
Yeah, I mean, the concerns with Dillingham are definitely valid. Personally, I'm just very bullish on Dillingham. This really predates any connection I have to the Timberwolves, actually. I remember during the 2024 draft cycle, I had him as my number one ranked prospect. I remember writing an article about why I think he's going to be a future star in this league. So it's not just because I'm writing for the Timberwolves that I'm a big Dillingham believer. It's something that goes back a long time for me. But at the same time, the concerns are definitely valid, especially like you said. If Chris Finch didn't trust him last year, I'm not sure why it changes to the point where he's going to get 20, 25 minutes a game. But when I look at Dillingham, and I think the reason I'm so confident in him is just because I think his shot creation ability is truly rare. And I think that's one of the hardest skills to have in this league. Especially with his size, it's really impressive how he can finish over taller players at the rim. He's just incredibly quick, has spectacular handles, and he can really score at all 3 levels. He can really stop on a dime at the mid range. Like I said, great finisher at the rim, especially for his size. And then shooting, well, his shooting numbers weren't great this year. Dating back to his college career and everything we knew about him coming into the draft, he's a really knockdown shooter, and you could even see that in small flashes, the ability to really hit difficult shots. As a pull-up guy or even just spot up, I think that skill set's going to be super valuable. And then as a playmaker, I think he's super underrated. I already mentioned the handles, but yeah, incredible ball handler, just super shifty, dazzling ball handling ability. But as a passer, I think he's pretty underrated. He makes really solid entry passes, driving kick plays, lobs. I think the lob will be massive, especially with Gobert. I think we're going to see a lot more of Dillingham and Gobert this year. And I think just his ability to throw lobs will be really vital for this Timberwolves team that doesn't really have a good lob passer outside of Conley, who, like we said, will have to be limited in his role this year. So I think all that together does set up Dillingham for a really nice second season. And I think if the Timberwolves were just a little bit worse of a team, we would have seen a lot more of him. I think that's kind of easy to say just because of how good they were and the situation they were in, but I think we would have seen a lot more of him on more of a rebuilding team, and he would just be looked at a little bit differently. But when I look at the type of offensive player he is, he really checks all the boxes of a high quality offensive point guard. And I think we've seen in recent years, despite sort of the discourse around his size, and defense is certainly a concern for a guy who is 6'1" and 165 pounds, 170 pounds, however much he weighs. But at the same time, we've seen a lot of smaller guards be successful. I look at a guy like Darius Garland, not exactly same play style, but same sort of stature. He's been so successful in this league, and I think Dillingham could be like that. I think that's obviously more of a high end. But even like a guy like Emmanuel Quickly, who's just an absolutely lethal scorer and a very solid playmaker as well. I think that's sort of a role that we could see him fit into and really contribute at the highest level for this team. So I am a little bit more confident in Dillingham than most people, and I also think not signing a guy like Brogdon is the right move for his development. Like you said, when you draft someone with the number 8 pick, especially they traded 2 future round picks to get him, you have to at least give him a chance. And hey, if he's not showing the right signs, the defense is a real problem. Maybe he's kind of rough as a decision maker, turning the ball over a lot, whatever the case may be. You can always sort of pivot and then make another move, but at least for the first half of the season, I think they really have to see what they have in Dillingham, and I personally have high expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right. I'm not, a full doubter of him. Um, there's been plenty of Kentucky point guards that have proven to do well in the NBA. So, we'll see. You can't really give up on a guy at the age of 20. As you mentioned, they did give up first round pick, the option to swap another first round pick. So they were believers. It just, it really had me question what Chris Finch thinks about him when he turned to Terrence Shannon. Even Jalen Clark got more minutes than him last year, and Clark was a second round pick in 2023. But yeah, I mean, 19 for part of last season, 20 years old now. So definitely should have the opportunity to prove that he belongs maybe with the starting lineup. I think, a team like Minnesota The highest upside might be with a Dillingham. The floor might be higher with Conley since he's such a steadying veteran presence, but the ceiling, I think you might have to give it to Dillingham.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we really hit on everything with that Dillingham conversation. And yeah, like I said, there's definitely reasonable concerns, but at the same time, I'm excited to see what he can do in a bigger role and personally do feel fairly confident. Now let's move on to Ant and Jaden McDaniels. I guess starting with Ant, he's obviously the star of this team, but at the same time, he's only 24, and he's obviously established himself as a clear top 10 player, maybe even a top 5 player in some people's eyes. But do you think he has another level to reach, and what sort of areas for improvement are you looking at with his game this year?
I mean, I think he might be looking to improve somewhere. We saw this past year where he really looked to shoot more three pointers and led the league. Had what 300 something made three pointers. Was pretty incredible. To see that growth, nearly 40% clip he hit them at. I think with him, he is in that borderline top five conversation. I don't necessarily have my own personal player rankings for this season right now. If I had to guess, I would think I'd have him probably a little outside that. I think his number one thing is to, have more consistency. There's still those games where he might go, I don't know, 8 for 22, 7 for 24. And they're not frequent, and they happen with everyone. They happen with Kobe. They happen with MJ. So it's not a huge concern. And the fact you mentioned, he is just 24. He turned it 2 days ago. So crazy that he's that age and he's in his sixth season. So really hasn't even reached the prime of his career yet. Um, I'd like to see him. Get back to distributing more. The assist to turnover ratio is actually one of the worst, might have been the worst in his career. I think actually other than his rookie year. So, trusting your teammates a little more. I know he's the ultimate bucket getter, top 10 in the league at that, certainly. But, you got a guy like Randall who could get you 20 a night, get Rudy Gobert some touches, let him feel like he's part of the offense as well. McDaniels is a very solid shooter. These guys, Shannon, Dillingham, Clark, they've proven that they can, well, mostly proven that they could shoot as well. So that's something I might like to see him do a little bit more. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think he could be a guy who finishes top 3, top 4 MVP voting this year, especially if the Wolves are a top 3, maybe 4 team in the West. It's going to be hard for them to be top 2. I mean, they weren't top 2 last year, but they still reached the conference finals. Actually finished sixth, but it was so tight. So I could see him improving on that seventh place MVP finish he's had the past 2 years, and just continuing. Maybe even I want to say maybe playing a little less minutes, but I just don't know if that's going to happen because so many young pieces on the team. Defensively, he's shown improvements. He's not going to be a guy in the all defensive conversation, but he's definitely not a turnstile on the defensive end. And, you could see that he knows when he really needs to give his full effort on that end. So that's not really a concern with me either. I think sky's the limit for him. I think he can be a future MVP. And he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, this Timberwolves fan base and, Knicks fan base as well. We'll talk about them. I've been waiting forever for that team. And, we all the talk about Edwards being the face of the league, which I think is silly. Like, what's face of the league? Why does that even matter? But anyhow, we heard that talk and how he didn't want to be it. And yeah, I think that he could continue to develop even further, be that guy that maybe even gets to the free throw line a little bit more, averaged 6.3 attempts last year. And I know, that's going to go down when you're shooting more three pointers, but, he still drives a ton. So, we'll see if he could get more calls, get more free points for the Timberwolves. But yeah, at the age of 24, you can't say that he's reached his complete ceiling already.
Yeah, most definitely. I think, sort of like you mentioned, the leap he took as a 3-point shooter last season wasn't something that was totally on people's radars. And then I think, like you said, the next jump for him is really that playmaking and just sort of making better reads as a passer, especially when the defense collapses on him, double teams him, whatever the case may be. We sort of saw his playmaking as a mixed bag in the playoffs against the Lakers and Warriors, especially the Lakers series. He was really excellent as a playmaker, and then he sort of reverted to some of his bad habits against the Thunder, who were obviously historically great defense, but that series he didn't look so great. So I think just making some of those reads and making a little bit quicker decisions is the next step for him. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see his turnovers come down and he bumps his assist averages up to like 6 a game or something like that. And I think that would really help him get into the MVP conversation, first team All NBA, sort of like you said, especially if that comes with more winning for the Timberwolves. The other sort of minor thing I'd look for him to improve at is the mid range game. When you look at his career early on, he was a really productive mid range shooter, and that sort of declined in recent years, especially last season when he was, quite frankly, one of the worst mid range shooters in the league. So I think just get into that mid range a little bit more is going to be another area of growth for him this upcoming season. We can move on to Jaden McDaniels, who's obviously not close to the same caliber of player as Anthony Edwards, but at the same time, he's going to be turning 25. And we saw a lot of offensive leaps from him last year, especially in the playoffs and second half of the season. Do you sort of see that as the new version of Jaden McDaniels? And do you think he maybe has even another level to reach as a scorer, shot creator, playmaker, any of that? What's your opinions on Jaden there?
I mean, I think the number one thing for him is to just become a more reliable 3-point shooter. Really, only once in his 5 years can you say that he was, an above average 3-point shooter. He did hit it at a very, he has hit it at a very solid clip the last two postseasons. So that's definitely been nice to see. But, last year, regular season, 33.7%. So, you would like to see that increase a little bit. The defensive end, he's, arguably top four, top five, forward defensive player. He's going to be that guy who is going to guard the opposition's best player, pretty much on a nightly basis, at least their best offensive player. And it's impressive to see. He's a guy who you could count on to be on the court every night, and that's as I mentioned earlier, that's key when I question the Timberwolves' depth after their first, let's say, 10 pieces. So yeah, maybe a few more drives as well. He's someone else who rarely gets to the free throw line, but yeah, he's that. I think he's almost like a perfect third or fourth option on a team where he's not going to command the ball, but he's going to give an effort every time, every game on the defensive end. And, you could at least count on him for 10 to 12 points, sometimes more than that. And again, as you mentioned, he's about to turn 25 in about a month. So another young piece who really hasn't reached his prime. And guys like that are important because Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, they're probably not going to get much better at this point. So, we'll see what happens with them. It's important for guys like him to show further improvement when there's guys like Randall and Gobert are getting older. And yeah, I just think he's such an excellent defensive piece. All defensive second team, not this season, the previous year. And yeah, I think he's a perfect guy for that championship contending team. He plays more than Kason Wallace, but OKC, that he might be there. That might be OKC's version of him. So all the good. Derek White is a souped up version of Jaden McDaniels, but he might be that guy for Boston. It just seems like those championship teams are always going to have a player like Jaden McDaniels, who isn't going to be your top scorer, but just an all around very good player who gives his effort on the defensive end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, sort of to your point about the 3-point shooting, when we did see him take that leap as a scorer, averaging 14, close to 15 a game, towards the end of the regular season and the playoffs, that was also paired with better shooting numbers. So I think that's going to be massive for Jaden this year just to maintain that sort of consistency as a shooter. But we also saw a lot more offensive aggression, a little bit more on ball stuff, more comfortable as a decision maker. And I think those are also some of the areas that he needs to maintain consistency in to be this Wolves' true third option. I feel like these last couple of years, it's sort of rotated, at least from a scoring standpoint, between him and Naz Reid as that third option for the Wolves. And I think for this team to reach their ceiling, they're going to need Jaden to take a little bit of a leap offensively. Not going to be anything crazy, but if he can get more so towards that 14, maybe even 15 point a game range. You saw last year was his career best year, averaging 12 points a game. So if he can just take a little bit more of a leap, I think it could help this Wolves team reach another level. And I personally do think he has that level to reach, especially entering his true prime at 25. And then you sort of mentioned guys around the league that you would compare him to. I feel like he definitely reminds me of the Knicks duo of OG
Okay,
Anunoby and
very
Mikal
good.
Bridges. I feel like just in terms of elite on ball defense and some versatility there as well. He's similar in that regard. And then he does play more so of an off ball role, but still having that ability to create for himself at times when need be. I think is something that Jaden can bring, but he doesn't bring it to the level of a Mikal or an OG just yet. But if he can get to that level, it would massively benefit this team. Before we get into over under win predictions, real quick, I think another big talking point with this team is just Gobert. He had really his worst offensive season since maybe his second or third year in the league. Do you feel like that decline is real, or do you think he can at least maintain his level of play from last season? And then, sort of with that, them drafting Johan Berenjay, do you think Berenjay could be in line for some spot minutes, or do you think this is just a pure development year
See,
for
I
him?
mean, I do think Berenger definitely has a load of potential, especially on the defensive end. But he's also, what, 19 years old? How long has he been playing basketball? 4 or 5 years. I don't see them using him as a rotation piece. I could be wrong. Again, injuries may force him to play at points, but I don't see him playing a role that much this year. When it comes to Gobert, I wouldn't be all that concerned, but he is 33 years old. Still a excellent defensive player, probably not quite at the level he was during his 4 Defensive Player of the Year seasons. But yeah, that's why it's really important for guys like Shannon and Clark and Dillingham to show that they could play and score, because I'm just not sure, how much Gobert's bringing to the table. I know there's been videos of him. I can't think of the shooting coach's name, but there's videos of him, working with him, and people are like, oh, is he going to develop a 3-point shot? I mean, we're going to be talking about the Knicks, but I see that every offseason with Mitchell Robinson doing, behind the back dribbles and, fadeaway 3-pointers. It's these guys do this during the offseason. You're not going to see it in the pros during the game. So, I don't really think he's going to develop a mid-range shot in his 13th year. I know a guy like Brook Lopez took him a while. I don't think it took him 13 years to start developing that outside shot. So, he is what he is. Incredibly, he has what? I think he has the best true shooting percentage in NBA history, or effective, one of the two. But, that's because he does all his work, most of his work within 5 feet of the rim. And, I think that's what he's going to continue to be. But yeah, I do think it's important to get him touches. You don't want that 5-on-4 offense, even when you have someone so offensively skilled as Anthony Edwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both of those points. With Berenger, I think this is just a pure development year, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just given that he did pick up basketball fairly recently, and how young and raw he is, especially on the offensive end. But yeah, like you said, just upside is through the roof, especially defensively. But this will definitely be more of a development year. I think he'll maybe get some spot minutes, and like you said, if injuries arise, but I think he's far from a consistent piece in this Wolves rotation. Especially you look at they really have 9 to 10 guys that they can comfortably play over him, so I don't see him playing a big role. But yeah, then with Gobert, I agree. I don't buy into the lethal shooter clips
There
either.
you go.
Taking a jump at 33 with his quite frankly limited offensive skill set, it does feel out of the question for me. But if he can at least give them 10 to 12 points a game still, I think he can be a positive player considering what he brings to the table defensively, and then his screening and rebounding as well. And I do think that Dillingham will benefit Gobert a little bit. I feel like just playing next to that facilitator really helps him. We saw that really throughout his career with Conley. And I think the similar things could happen with Dillingham. I also do think a big part of Gobert's struggles last year are sort of tied to Conley declining and having to play less minutes. So I think that's just another big factor at play there. So yeah, I'm expecting him to sort of just maintain his level of play. I'm not expecting a crazy drop off, but certainly not a jump, which has been interestingly a talking point this offseason, given those viral clips. But yeah, before we close it out with the Wolves, I just want to get your prediction. Over under is set right now at 49 and a half. Do you think they go over that? They hit 49 wins last season. Do you think they go over that? And then ultimately, where do you think they finish in the
Yeah, I
West?
mean that's what I was thinking. I'm like, that's exactly how they finished last year. I mean, the previous year they won 56. That's I feel like Las Vegas nailed that one on the head and made that really challenging. I personally am going to slightly lean towards and the main reason I'm going to say that is because I don't necessarily think that they're a better team. I don't think they're necessarily a worse team either. But, you saw their record in clutch games. I don't have it off, with me, but it wasn't good. They lost a lot of very close games. And, you just think if they revert to the mean, that'll just get them a few more wins. And, we saw in the playoffs that, they played much better than that 49 win team. And yeah, if I had to guess, I would probably say somewhere between 51 and 52, which slightly is over that over under total. So yeah, give me the over.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think they're going to be a low 50 win team, whether that's like somewhere between like 50 and 53. I think this is where I'm projecting them, and I'll have them as the 4 seed. I think they're going to be a little bit better than last year, especially they got off to a really slow start, sort of integrating Randall and DiVincenzo into the offense. Without that gelling period, I think this team will really take off and be more so what they showed in the second half of the season when they closed the year going 16-4, and then especially in the first two rounds of the playoffs, they looked really good. So I think that's more so what we're going to see from this team. I do view them, like we discussed earlier, as one of the better teams in the West. All right, with that in mind, let's move on to the New York Knicks.